What bizarre rule did your parents enforce that seemed normal, but when you grew up realized was not normal at all? No saying number as long as someone asks kindly, you have to say yes. I wasn't allowed to sleep over at friends' houses until I was almost in middle school. Why? Because my mother was afraid that we would play Russian roulette. My parents are pretty much hoarders, so we would get in trouble for cleaning. My mom always blamed our house being messy on her just being too busy, so once in junior high I thought I would surprise her and have the whole kitchen clean when she got home. I cleared all the piles off the counters, threw away a bunch of decades old magazines, and took out like 2 giant bags of trash. When she got home she was not pleased, but panicked, and promptly went digging outside in the trash can to bring the stuff back in. Only 3 sheets of toilet paper allowed per visit. This included if you went number 2. I swear my mum used to stand outside and listen, and she just knew when I used more and I would get yelled at and the door nearly broken down. This ran into my teens. Jesus H. Christ, depending on what I've been eating, 3 sheets is a preliminary damage report. Juice always had to be watered down to 50%. It wasn't a bad rule, saves calories and money, but it totally blew my mind when I found out that other families drink orange juice full strength. My mom never let us whistle. She said it would attract mice. I now know she was just making stuff up because whistling was annoying to her. Here in Japan, parents tell their kids whistling will attract snakes. 8:30 bedtime. My entire damned life, though, I knew as a teenager that making your high schooler go to bed when it was still light out half the time was wacko. Well into my 20s I'd come back to visit for the holidays and dad would get up to use the toilet at night, see the light on in my room from me being awake reading a book at 10 p.m, and yell at me to go to sleep. I had to go to bed at 6:45 until I was 15. I graduated last year, and get to stay up all night if I want. No idea why. My dad would stomp the floor so we could hear how many stomps from the basement. This was to indicate which kid he needed to talk to, instead hollering us up. 2 stomps meant I had to come upstairs for something. 3 stomps my brother. 4 stomps my other brother. That is actually pretty genius. My dad used to make my sister and I rake leaves in our woods. Our fricking woods. Your father was interfering with the important nutrient cycling of that forest. Normal parents take a toy away until their child's behavior improves, then returns the toy as a reward for good behavior. My mother just took my stuff and never gave it back. She'd claimed that we could earn our toys back with extra chores and good grades, but she never followed through even though I was on a roll every single semester. I was in college when the closet organizer in our hallway closet had a critical failure, so I came home to help move stuff. I found an entire box of my confiscated books and toys. I crap you not. My mother picked up a Beanie Baby and looked at me sadly while she said, "I was waiting for you to earn this back. What were you going to surprise me with after I walked the stage and got my diploma?" This is a good incentive for a kid not to improve their behavior. Father-in-law forbade anyone from drinking a beverage during the first half of any meal. No water, no milk, no juice, nothing, no matter how thirsty you were. He took this very seriously and would berate both kids and adults at the table if they tried. Imho, this ruined the meal experience. The rest of the family tolerated this for some reason. I had to explain to my wife no one else ever did this and we would never use that rule at our own dinner table. We had to wake up whenever my parents got up, even if it was 4 a.m. One of them would yell up the stairs for us to get up. Didn't realize I could get up at my own leisure until I got married and moved out. One day I got out of bed when my husband did and we were sitting in the living room watching TV when I exclaimed that I was still tired. He said, "So go back to bed then," and it was like those moments on a show when an actor just looks at the camera with a surprised expression. The sudden realization that I could wake up whenever I wanted was overwhelming. Also, now that I have a kid, I have no idea why they wouldn't let us sleep so they could have some free time. Like, dang, if my son is sleeping I'm taking in all the quiet and enjoying myself some free time. This drove me nuts as a kid. Dad was a farmer, so 5 a.m. starts were standard. He thought just because he was up every other bastard had to be as well. So dumb, because all my brother and I would do was fight for hours. If he had just let us sleep he would have had some peace and quiet. That the man was watching us. My sister and I as kids. Not Santa. Literally the man. So say if we were playing up, they'd go, "You'd better stop that. He's watching," and we'd quit immediately for the impending dread this man would bring. How freaking creepy is that? Holy crap, we had this too. It was always the man upstairs or the man across the road. Threats of him coming over and yelling at us, taking us away when we were loud bratty were common. I remember one day becoming curious about him, the threat at that point proving to be empty, and started asking questions. Conveniently, he moved away shortly afterwards. I wasn't allowed in the basement. Turns out they were smoking weed down there. My parents smoked weed in the laundry. I just thought that's what laundry smelled like. I didn't realize not everybody's house was spotless. My siblings and I cleaned the whole house every week, moved furniture to vacuum, dust, etc, and we had a housekeeper that would come for a full day to clean, dust and vacuum the stuff we did 2-3 days prior every week as well. We also had several old trees in our yard, would have to pick up any stick that fell daily. Occasionally the whole family would go through the yard on our hands and knees picking up any stick longer than 1 inch. Once when I was in high school, my mom wouldn't let me go to practice after school because I needed to tighten every screw in the house because things were coming loose. I was not allowed to go anywhere alone until like 14. Seriously, not even allowed to walk to school with friends. I assumed everyone was that sheltered until I started high school and realized it was just me. Growing up, I lived in the country and took the bus to school. My brother and I would stand at the end of the driveway waiting for the bus, on our own. A couple of neighbor kids, 4 years younger than me, always waited for the bus with their mom. She was still out there with them when they started high school. It was kind of weird. I wasn't allowed to have boys phone or come calling for me because my mom didn't want me to turn out to be some little hoe. Joke's on you, mom. My parents made me go to church 4 times a week where they constantly preached about purity and how not being pure would ruin you. I slept with a boy at 15, decided I was ruined, dropped out of high school my senior year and became a stripper. Thanks mom and dad. We weren't allowed peace signs growing up. My mom remembers some speech from when she was a kid about how communism would come under the sign of peace, so peace signs were banned in our house. Those troll figurines were banned too. That's cause the troll figurines are creepy. You eat everything you're served. So if they put a whole lot of food on our plate, and we had already eaten enough and were not hungry anymore, we would have to stay on the table until we were done. Regularly making dirty jokes since I was 12 with my own parents. It turns out nobody does that with their parents. My friends were all amazed my mom and I would crack jokes and make fun of each other. I was just as surprised that their moms had such big egos they couldn't take a joke. When I got home from school, my dad would always ask, "How did you frick up today?" I was a prissy, straight A student, so this was his attempt to keep my ego in check. I later learned normal parents asked, "What did you learn today?" I had no rules or chores growing up. I could eat as much candy or drink as much soda or eat as much junk food as I wanted. My mom would actually get angry if my dad had us do chores. She would say, "You only get to be a kid once and then you're grown and you'll have to rely on yourself." I am a responsible, hard-working 24-year-old now, so I guess it's kinda bizarre that I had no rules at all. My mom has set prices that are a deal for produce, and we could never buy anything more expensive than that price. Grapes had to be less than $1.19 or lb. Corn had to be at least 6 for $1. It wasn't until I was well into adulthood that I realized I could buy whatever I dang well pleased no matter what the price. Interestingly, her deal prices haven't changed since I was a kid in the 80s. Your mom must be very hungry these days. We could only eat 2 cookies at a time, and no more than 4 in a day. I was living on my own for like a year abiding by this rule, until one day I was like, man, I really want 3 Oreos, not 2, and I did it. I had this rule too. Also realized I was still following it when I was like 17/18, and my mom noticed. She laughed at me. We had a lock on the fridge and were never allowed to help ourselves to anything. You had to ask. Usually the answer was no. I started buying junk food and hiding it in my closet. I think my father was completely clueless about growing teenage appetites and smoked, so his appetite was almost non-existent. I struggle with binge eating to this day. I still love a good gorge. It means freedom and a giant middle finger to that lock on the fridge. I've heard of kids who have had this problem and they usually end up fat as they get old due to the freedom of being allowed to eat whatever they want in their own homes. Had to go to church 4 times a week to set an example. Anytime I asked to go out with friends to do something that would have mixed genders or could be construed as a party, I was asked would Jesus do something like that? Yes, he totally freaking would have. My mom wouldn't let us use water guns. We could only use these things called squirters, and if the neighborhood kids were having water fights, she would come out and test the strength of the sprays. If it was too strong, we had to go inside. In high school, I went to a pool party with super soakers and basically had an anxiety attack. I was so afraid someone would post photos. When people collected canned goods for food pantries, we could only give them creamed corn. I once was grounded for taking some green beans for the homeless shelter. I make it a point to find out what the pantry needs before donating now. It's never creamed corn. We could only mow the yard wearing a bathing suit. Finally own my own house and wear shorts and a shirt, and it's still not a great chore, but at least I'm clothed. We were not allowed to say these words. Shut up, fart, dumb, and stupid. My siblings and I are all adults now, and my mother still gets angry when we say any of those things. She gets particularly upset when we ask the question, insert name, did you fart? I ask that question all the time now just to frick with her. My mom had this rule, but she also regularly called me a piece of crap and my dad a bastard, so I just kind of ignored it. Most of the time it wasn't a problem. Every Sunday we would dress up and go to Big Boy at around 10 AM. Every other family in town was also in fancy clothes and at Big Boy. Later I learned that all those other people were at church, which we did not participate in. So either we were pretending we were at church, or we worship Big Boy. All hail Big Boy, our Lord and Savior. My mom never let me eat any push pops, ring pops, etc. She said she did it because she didn't want perverts getting bad ideas. I always thought it was weird. After he discovered that I'd been watching P, my dad routinely checked my internet history, not the browser history, the DNS logs, which only he had access to. I was confronted multiple times in high school because I'd been looking at content that he didn't think was suitable. I wasn't allowed to get a smartphone until college because it would have been possible to browse the internet unmonitored. My dad is a very introverted guy, and he never liked to be in large crowds, so unless it was a school event, I was forbidden from going to any large crowded event places like the mall, concerts, sporting events. I was told that this was for my own safety. I was never allowed to go anywhere New Year's Eve, even in the morning. My mother was convinced that there were drunks on the road at 10 AM. New Year's Day was fine, but not on the eve. I'm over 40 and she still complains if I go somewhere that I'm going to get hit by a drunk. My brothers and I were only allowed to drink 1 glass of orange juice during breakfast. If we got caught trying to drink it at any other point in the day, my dad would lose his crap. My mother knocked things in the floor all the time and never cleaned up. Always too lazy to get a job. She existed. Father worked all day and didn't feel like cleaning. And we went to school, so decided it wasn't our place. By the end there was trash piled up almost 4 inches everywhere. And while I knew it was, I didn't personally like it. I didn't know it was far abnormal. I just kept my own room clean and let that be the end of it. The bottom layers had turned to true dirt by the time we were cleaning it and moving out. Dogs had crap everywhere and it never got taken care of. On top of this, I was never allowed to see friends outside school until I could drive, and as such had many social issues until well after graduation. My very liberal mother did not allow us to watch The Simpsons. Never really understood why. Couldn't play video games unless it was the weekend. Seems normal at first, but then you realize that it just enforces bad habits. My brother and I would wait until the weekend, and then binge the entire weekend playing video games. And even if we didn't feel like it, and though it would be better to do something else, we always said, well, we better play anyway because we won't be able to after. Also, what were we supposed to do when the homework was done? It isn't like homework took up the entire day. I grew up with the same rule, but eventually I transitioned into binging every day of every week during high school, when they became a bit more lenient. Had to eat cheese strings the same way you might eat a banana, with the plastic still on the bottom half, just taking bites off the top. I just wanted to make a wacky weird thing. Your parents are monsters. My dad had several weird ones to this day I still don't understand. I wasn't allowed to read at the table while I was eating or drinking, even if I was completely by myself drinking coffee. If he walked in on me he would berate me for having a toy at the table. No one in the family was allowed to drink at the counter in the kitchen. I have a habit of just draining a glass of water and pouring myself a second one. I didn't see the point of filling a glass, going to sit down, spend about a minute drinking, and then getting back up just to refill the glass. I tend to drain most drinks in a matter of seconds, so I got into the habit of just drinking at the counter. First time my dad saw me doing this he lost it yelling at me about how it wasn't normal and to sit down at the table while I drank. Reading books before bedtime was forbidden. Everyone in the house throughout the day has to be productive. Reading is for right before you go to bed. Finish all your chores before everyone else frick you. Your brother/sister is still cleaning. You're just being lazy by sitting down to read a book. He also had major issues with me just reading in general, even for class assignments. I actually had a full-on argument with him a couple of times about The Great Gatsby and Catcher in the Rye I was reading for my English lit class. He was trying to prevent me from reading them, but I shot back I had to because it counted towards my grade. The entire class also took a huge test on each book, so not reading wasn't an option. Yet, he was a bizarre person. Suffice to say we don't talk anymore. I was raised in a funny Christian household. Though our media options were limited to VeggieTales and the like, we always had to ask before watching any video. Usually, the answer was a simple yes or no. But this one time, I was around 14 and asked my dad if I could watch Winnie the Pooh. It was for my little siblings, but I was bored. He told me, dead serious, that he needed to pray about it. Right there, he asked God for wisdom in deciding whether I should watch it or not. I stood there just trying to figure out if he was messing with me. He was not. After about a minute, he looks at me and says, I guess that would be okay. My parents left all the original protective plastic covers on anything they bought, like lampshades or plastic film on VCRs. The only verbalized rules in my house were safety rules. For example, no playing in the street, no going on the monkey bars if your sister is underneath, etc. For behavioral control, they used stories. A few examples. You shouldn't touch bleach because your colors will fade, and then daddy won't be able to see you, and he'll be sad wandering around saying where's my daughter? You shouldn't frown, because when kids used to have to perform on vaudeville stages, the ones who didn't smile didn't earn any money and then their families starved. You shouldn't try to scare people by shouting boo because daddy might jump and fall out the window, shattering all his vertebrae and paralyzing him for life. You shouldn't distract mommy while she's driving, because she might miss the exit and drive all the way to Canada by mistake, and since we don't have passports, they won't let us into Canada, and we will never find a bed. We lived in New Jersey, and so on. I'm laughing as I type these because they were a surprisingly effective teaching method. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.